Now we're going to talk about part 5, which is close reading, and apply what we've thought about in terms of connotation and also what we've been talking about throughout the year so far um, with our annotating skills. So far this year, when I have talked to you about annotating, what I've been talking about has been annotating as you read a chapter. And our purpose for doing that is to help you understand more about what you're reading and so that you're reading actively so you remember it and you can make sense of it. And for those kinds of annotations, what I'm asking you to do are to make comments in every few pages. And those comments have been summaries or inferences or questions, predictions, definitions of words. So in that way, we can kind of think of annotating as you're reading through a chapter of a book as like all of the stuff that your brain is doing so that you're reading actively. What we're going to talk about today is annotating for close reading. And what that means is annotating or writing down comments and interacting with the text to help you understand how the author is writing the story. So this is much more specific and much more focused on a short piece of text where you're writing down everything that you notice and can squeeze out of the words. So for this type of annotating, you're making comments on nearly every sentence. And you're doing a lot more of pointing out what you're noticing and a lot more of analyzing what the author is doing and how they're doing it than the kind of annotating that we do as we're reading through a chapter for the first time. So in that way, we can think of this type of annotating as the annotating that you would do with a juicy quote, except that this juicy quote could be like a paragraph or even a page. So we're going to apply this in practice on a passage from chapter 2. This is when the boys have decided to build a fire to get enough smoke to get a rescue signal. And they struggle to build a fire at first, but eventually they really get it going. And then now all of a sudden the fire has almost kind of gone out of control. So I'm gonna read this aloud, and then I'm gonna go through and tell you what I'm noticing and annotate, and ask you to copy down my annotations onto your paper, and you can pause at any time when you need to catch up. The flames, as though they were a kind of wildlife, crept as a jaguar creeps on its belly toward a line of birch-like saplings that fledged an outcrop of the pink rock. They flapped at the first of the trees, and the branches grew a brief foliage of fire. The heart of flame leapt nimbly across the gap between the trees and then went swinging and flaring along the whole row of them. Beneath the capering boys, a quarter of a mile square of forest was savage with smoke and flame. The separate noises of the fire merged into a drum roll that seemed to shake the mountain. You got your small fire all right. Startled, Ralph realized that the boys were falling still and silent, feeling the beginnings of awe at the power set free below them. The knowledge and awe made him savage. "Oh, shut up! I got the conch," said Piggy in a hurt voice. "I got a right to speak." They looked at him with eyes that lacked interest in what they saw and cocked ears at the drummel of the fire. Piggy glanced nervously into hell and cradled a conch. Okay, now I'm going to start again back at the beginning. I'm going to start writing down what I'm noticing, and I'm looking especially for words with powerful connotations. I'm looking for similes, metaphors, personification, which is when an author describes something that's not a person as if they are a person. I'm looking for colors. I'm looking for patterns, things that I'm seeing repeat over and over again. I'm looking for powerful images that the author is creating, whether that's sound, sight, smell, taste, or touch. And I'm doing this to all kind of like squeeze out everything from this passage, pick apart what the author is doing, kind of dissect it to try to understand what William Golding is doing in this passage and how he's doing it. So the first thing that I notice is this simile, crept as a jaguar creeps on its belly. So this is a simile that's comparing the flames to a jaguar. So the flames are creeping towards the trees, the line of birch-like saplings, the way that a jaguar creeps on its belly when it's hunting its prey. They flapped at the first of the trees, and the branches grew a brief foliage of fire. Foliage is like plants or bushes. The other thing that I should mention when I'm doing a close reading is definitely I'm always looking up words that I don't know and defining them. When you're reading through an entire chapter of Lord of the Flies, you probably should not stop to look up every single word that you don't know. when you're doing a close reading, if it's a small passage like this, I absolutely do expect that you are looking up every single word that you don't know so that you can make sense of it, because the purpose of a close reading is to understand like every single word and how it fits together in this passage. The heart of flame leapt nimbly across the gap between the boys. So heart of flame, I think is kind of a metaphor here. It's not an actual heart. It seems like he's still describing it almost like an animal because it's leaping nimbly and swinging and flaring. And then went swinging and flaring along the whole row of them. Beneath the capering boys, a quarter of a mile square of forest was savage with smoke and flame. So first, this word savage, I want to pay attention to because I'm seeing it repeat. We've seen it repeat a lot through the story already. And the word savage is going to become a really important word for the boys. So I'm just going to pay attention and notice that there's this repetition of the word savage, and that Golding applies it to describe both the forest when it's on fire, and he applies it to describe Ralph and how Ralph realizes that they have this power of creating fire and using it. And that knowledge is what makes him feel savage. Capering is like being goofy, silly, dancing around. Kind of light and playful, which is interesting because the boys are doing that, but below them, they've set the forest on fire. The separate noises of the fire merged into a drum roll that seemed to shake the mountain. So is the fire literally actually a drum roll? Like, is it playing drums? No. So this merged into a drum roll is a metaphor here, but it's creating a sound image. Another word that we can use for this is auditory imagery. And it's helping to show how powerful the fire is and how it's kind of overtaken the mountain. You got your small fire all right. Startled, Ralph realized that the boys were falling still and silent, feeling the beginnings of awe and power set free below them. The knowledge and awe made him savage. Oh, shut up. I got the conch, said Piggy, said in a hurt voice. So if this is Piggy, I think the oh, shut up is probably coming from Ralph, because he feels savage now that he knows what the fire can do, which means that the you got your small fire all right is coming from Piggy. And that makes sense because he says you got your small fire. He doesn't want to have anything to do with the fire. So he's setting himself apart from the other boys. It's their fire, it's not his. Ralph is startled because he maybe has been he's been kind of mesmerized by the fire, as have the other boys. They're falling still and silent. So he's mesmerized by the fire and the fact that the boys can create it. So they have power in a way they didn't have before. I'm going to go down to they looked at him. They looked at him with eyes that lacked interest in what they saw. So they lack interest in Piggy. They still care about the fire. And cocked ears at the drum roll of the fire. Piggy glanced nervously into hell and cradled the conch. So he's not looking into literal hell right here. So this is definitely a metaphor, comparing the fire in the forest to hell. Okay, so let's take a look. So see all of these annotations? I would never expect that you're annotating a page of like chapter 6 of Lord of the Flies the way that we've annotated this, to the level that we've annotated this. But when we're doing a close reading, that's what we're doing. We're looking almost like on a sentence by sentence, word by word basis and writing down everything that we notice. And in fact, if it was not for the sake of time, there's more that we could go back and look at here. I think there's still so much more that we could squeeze out of this. But we are going to move on to part 6, which is some close reading questions. And this is what I'm going to be asking you to do on your own eventually. So first, identify one simile in this passage and copy it here. So the simile that we identified was the flames crept as a jaguar creeps on its belly. So this is a simile because it's using the word like or as to make the comparison. What is the effect of the simile? So to help you start to analyze effects, I've given us a sentence frame to fill in. So by comparing the fire to a jaguar creeping on its belly, Golding suggests that the fire is, so he's suggesting the fire is something like a wild animal, but it's also a wild animal that's like hunting its prey, so that there's something predatory about the fire, and it's going to like take over the forest and maybe like eat it and destroy it the way a jaguar would eat and destroy its prey. So suggests that the fire is predatory, meaning it's a predator going after the prey of the forest, and maybe even wild and out of control, because it's like a wild animal. It can't be controlled. So just like a jaguar can't be tamed because it's a wild creature, this fire can't be tamed. Okay. Next, I'm going to ask you to brainstorm connotations for these words. So pause for a minute, see if you can brainstorm like at least 3 or 4 connotations for each word, and then come back and we'll see. I'll tell you what I was thinking. So one of the connotations for hell definitely is fire and flames, like being burned up. Hell obviously is a very negative connotation. It's eternal suffering. It's where Satan, the devil, demons live, or whatever exists there. I don't know if you call it live, but they exist there. And it's kind of interesting because it's kind of the opposite of Lord, as in the title. So we could think back to the connotations that we saw for Lord, and hell is like the opposite. There's no rescue. There's no salvation. No one saves in hell. Okay, cradled is really interesting. Cradled connotations are it's positive. It's something you cradle a baby. So nurture it, comfort it. So something that's precious, small, fragile. Okay, and then finally, the use of the word cradled to describe Piggy's actions suggests that Piggy sees the conch as something precious, fragile, and in need of protection. Okay, so we did this one together. We're going to keep practicing this together and on your own, and eventually you're going to do this type of thing where you're analyzing a passage through a close reading, annotating it, and answering questions for an assessment at the end of our Lord of the Flies unit.